Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Girard.
The challenges and benefits of hiring refugees. Now, we are in a negative unemployment market, and there is just not enough workers on the open job market. The solution might be taking a different avenue. There is great value to expanding beyond your scope of the limited talent pool into unfamiliar waters. Consider people who are motivated, engaged, reliable to elevate your company performance. Today's quote: we must find a better way to balance our tradition as a state welcoming of refugees while ensuring the safety and security of our citizens. And that was our friend, Mr. Bruce Rauner, who was the former governor of Illinois. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. Our mission is to help entrepreneurs and hiring managers avoid costly hiring mistakes. We do this by identifying a specific problem and providing proven tactical solutions to help your company win the right hire. We share insights from top-performing rebel entrepreneurs, disruptors, and industry experts like our guest today, Mr. Chris Chancey. Chris is the founder and CEO of Amplio Recruiting. Amplio is a staffing agency placing refugees into jobs across the U.S. Chris launched Amplio in 2014 after moving into a refugee community outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and now leads a team that has placed over 5,000 refugees from 40 different countries into full-time employment at over 300 companies. As a social entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and author of the book Refugee Workforce, articulating the economic impact of refugees in America, Chris believes in leveraging business to create a greater stability for the 70 million displaced people around the globe, which is what makes Chris the perfect expert for today's topic. Chris, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to jump into this conversation today.
Me too. I am too. This is actually kind of an interesting topic because until you and I talked on the phone a few weeks ago, it's not really anything that was on my radar. So thank you for educating me on it. So today we're going to cover a few things: why refugees make great hires. We're going to dispel some of the beliefs. And then we're going to provide a how-to guide on how to locate and hire refugees. Sound like a plan today?
That sounds great. It's a good distraction from all the political conversations I've been in recently. So I think this is a great a map here for providing great value. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm not a big political show type guy like that. So let's talk about why hiring refugees is a good pool of talent.
Yeah, so kind of like you just said, Rick, a few weeks ago, this was not really a topic on your radar. It's kind of the case for me as well. About 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, my wife and I moved into a refugee community outside of Atlanta, and my expectation was that I would find individuals in the community who had gone through some horrific situations and they were living on public assistance and nonprofits could help support them. And in reality, what I found was a lot of people who wanted to work, and everybody I met said, "Can you help me find a job?" So I started diving into the research and trying to better understand this community. And what I found was pretty interesting. First of all, that anybody who resettles in the U.S. as a refugee is immediately legal to work. So they have all the documentation that would allow them to be a permanent resident in the U.S.
Really? So they don't have to go through any immigration once they get a refugee status?
Right. So refugees are immigrants, but
Sure.
Not every immigrant is a refugee. And so yeah, when they resettle, they go through an extensive vetting by Homeland Security. The director of the FBI says it's easier to join the FBI than it is to become a refugee in the U.S. So it's a very intense vetting process. But once they are given permanent status in the U.S., they're legal to work. So that's first and foremost is a huge benefit to anyone interested in hiring from that community. We run E-Verify on everyone we employ, and that process is always very smooth.
So what is the immigration status that they're on?
Well, in many cases, they'll be resettled as a refugee. So that is the immigration status.
Okay.
But,
so they don't have to go and get an H-1B or some other...
No.
Really? Wow.
No, so they can be resettled on the refugee visa. There's some others as well for individuals who are from Afghanistan or Iraq who fought with the U.S. military, translated for U.S. troops. They can be resettled on an SIV, a special immigrant visa. And those individuals are great. They speak English and very disciplined and want to work. So that's probably step one to start off with.
So it's legal to work. What are the other benefits of hiring a refugee?
Yeah, so some of the other things we saw pretty quickly as we started to place refugees in jobs. One of the ones that's pretty compelling, especially considering what's happening right now in our country. Since we started our agency 5 years ago, we've had 5,000 refugees we placed into full-time employment. We have yet to have one person walk into our office that has failed a drug test. And I know that sounds crazy, but we've got multiple offices around the country. We're testing every person before they go on the job site. We've yet to have one failure. And so right now in the U.S., drug test failures at company sites that are reporting their drug tests to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they're at the highest they've ever been in the history of the U.S., drug test failures. A community that doesn't have any substance abuse challenges and drug abuse isn't common is a great asset. Some companies are having to pull back on their standards and their testing, which just means that there potentially are individuals who pose a risk to themselves and to other people on the job site. So that's a big factor. And then the other things we see, high retention. There's such a desire to provide for their family, just a high motivation overall, just dependable employees that we see across the board. So typically in the industry we're in, we see around a 40% industry standard retention. So 4 out of 10 people will still be at your company after 3 months of employment. And that's across the industry. What we see when we're working with the refugee community is 80%, 8 out of 10 people still working at your company after 3 months. And we see 70% after 1 year. So there's a double the retention rate within the community, which a lot of companies get really excited about.
Now, where do most of the refugees come from?
Yeah, so it's going to change according to what's happening in the world and, where there's civil unrest and violence and, natural disasters and things like that occurring. In the U.S. right now, the country sending the most refugees to the U.S. is from the nation of Congo in Africa.
Oh, really?
There's a few other African countries, and then Burma from Southeast Asia, and in the Middle East, we still have Syrians, Afghanis, and Iraqis who are being resettled.
What does a company need to know before they start looking into hiring refugees?
Yeah, so there's certainly a few that are helpful to be aware of. I think certainly being willing to make some sacrifices on the front end, knowing that you'll have a huge gain in the long run to see that kind of retention that you hope to see and engagement from the community. But yeah, first off, you've got to consider inclusivity at your company. What's your company culture like? And is it a place where individuals who did not grow up in this culture or did not speak English as a first language, is it a place where they can flourish?
So that might incur an additional cost of maybe getting somebody who's a translator or trying to hire somebody who speaks pretty good English.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Some individuals come with fluency, like I mentioned earlier, individuals who translated for our U.S. troops and things like that. But for the most part, there will be a language curve there. But what we see across the board is individuals who have a job, their English increases so rapidly because they're forced to use that on the job and learn new vocabulary. Yeah, certainly a huge factor. And there's a lot of tech tools that are out there now. One company we partner with is called Voxy that makes the language learning process at specific companies based on specific jobs very easy. And so it's a hurdle. It's not a barrier that you can't navigate. It's a hurdle that can be overcome with some communication.
So let's say you're looking at most refugees. Are they coming over with advanced skills? Are they primarily blue collar? How does that usually work out?
Yeah. So we do see a percentage of the refugee community resettling in the U.S. that have specific skills and have a background in specific areas. The challenge is that some of them are not able to continue to pursue those occupations based on having to achieve, further education or certificates or licenses in the U.S. So there's really a small percentage of individuals that their skill directly transfers into the U.S. market right away. So many of them have to find a new job or kind of start completely over in an entry-level role and work their way up in whatever industry that might be in. So we see that kind of all across industries from, medical, healthcare, manufacturing, hospitality, individuals that have incredible degrees kind of starting over at the bottom to kind of earn their way up.
Do they mind starting at the bottom?
Well, of course, that's on an individual level, but most often what we see is there's a high motivation to work and provide for the family, and so got to do what you got to do to get rolling. And you also see just that determination and perseverance that has gotten them to this point. So it's this kind of like, at this point, they believe in themselves and they've overcome so much that starting over in a new job is, it's something that they can do, and they'll continue to push. And we see, really high entrepreneurship rates as well from the refugee community, higher than almost double the U.S. born population when it comes to entrepreneurship. So there's definitely a mindset that says, hey, I'm going to go after this and be highly motivated and see where it gets.
That's fascinating. Do you have an idea of what the percentage of refugees that come over that actually have advanced skills? Are we looking at what, like maybe 10 to 20%-ish, or?
Yeah, I would say that's probably a good estimate. Somewhere in that 10 to 20% range of individuals that have skills that can transfer pretty quickly. One of the skills that we're seeing that percentage increase quite a bit is software development. So, it's certainly a skill at this point that can be taught and learned anywhere in the world. And in many cases, certainly there's countries all over the globe that are doing a lot of work to upskill individuals. And many of these places where refugees are coming from are places where STEM and science and technology is much more of a part of their education system than it is in the U.S. So these are individuals who have that capacity, and they pick up training pretty quickly, either abroad or once they get here, and they're able to step into roles like that.
So it's really fairly easy. The only thing is you really have to set your culture up from a perspective of being able to have a diversity-based mindset, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw in the process of publishing the book as we connected with companies that we work with, what was really interesting to find is that none of these companies that are really flourishing by tapping into the refugee workforce, none of them set out to be a diverse company. But what they did do is set out to have a very inclusive culture and a healthy work environment where everyone can come and bring their whole self to work and contribute to whatever is happening in the workplace. And that has created diversity, but that wasn't the end goal. And so I think that's a really important point, because if your goal is diversity, you probably are going to take a different path to get there that may be a little bit easier by sprinkling in some people of different cultural backgrounds here and there. But yeah, pursuing a healthy culture, it does require some sacrifice, but I think it's well worth it. And the companies that, we study and that we work with would certainly agree with that. So if you're willing to engage there, there's other things. I mean, transportation is always a factor that has to be overcome for individuals who are somewhat new arrivals to the U.S. But, those are hurdles and things that can be overcome in the process of gainful employment.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. All right, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I'm your host, Rick Girard, and for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsors. Find out how healing a person's pain points attracts amazing people to your company. Sign up for our Passive Talent workshops, or check out my Passive Talent webinar at stridesearch.com. Today, our guest is Chris Chancey. Chris is the founder and CEO of Amplio Recruiting. Wow, we got a little tongue twister there. And we're talking about hiring refugees. Chris, let's actually break this down. I think a lot of us just don't know. It's funny because when you and I talked, you kind of educated me a lot on this. I never really thought of this as being part of a talent pool. So now that we're kind of bringing awareness to our audience and to the entrepreneurs out there, let's teach them how to tap into this. Of course, people can surely reach out to you, and I'll give you a plug at the end, but for areas out of your expertise, where do they go? So where do they start first?
I think it's important to first just recognize that there's value in the refugee community. And as weird as it is to feel like that's kind of step one, I don't think our government, we're not at a place where our country even as a whole recognizes there's value there. These individuals are seen as either a charity case or a terrorist threat, right? They might be dangerous to our national security in some way. That couldn't be further from the truth.
And it seems like the perception is that they're all using up public funds and welfare and whatever else. Right. And that's not really the case, is it?
No, I mean, we see, roughly the U.S. spends around $2,000 per person that's resettled in the U.S. And we see that refugees are contributing back more than they took from the U.S. after 90 days being in the country. So, I mean, this is a group of people that wants to work. So I think that's step one. Just recognize there's value here. It's worth some investigation and some effort on your part to create an environment where, this community can come to your company and thrive. So I would start there. But I think, it's easy to get into a little bit more practical, specific examples. What are things that you do at your company to create more of an inclusive environment? How do you prepare your company to receive individuals who may not be the same as your current kind of employee base, and how can they come and flourish?
Well, first it comes down from the top, right? From the CEO. The CEO's got to be open to it. This is scary territory, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think a lot of times there's the potential from the executive level to look at, okay, well, how is this going? What is this going to cost us, right? Like, how is this going to change from the current kind of program we have to recruit and retain? I mean, isn't this HR's problem, in a sense? But I think if there's a bigger picture here, not necessarily even talking about the moral impact or social impact, but just purely economics, if we're willing to engage and change a little bit of the way that we currently do things, we could see a big impact from that. We have a company here in Atlanta. They make all the headlights for Tesla that goes on all the Tesla vehicles. And they had some pretty strict requirements early on for employees at their company. For example, just something as simple as a college degree being a requirement to work at a company. But as we started sending over the first candidates for the positions, and they saw these individuals in action and their ability to learn so quickly, in a role like a quality assurance role, it was enough proof for them to say, okay, we got to go in and change some of our standards and requirements because we need these individuals, and we think they can help our company grow. And so that's, some small changes led to a huge team that they've recruited there now, and it's added a lot of value for the company. So I think we got to be open to making some small changes that can add, greater benefit in the long run for everyone.
The nice part about that is that they actually saw the value, or they had the wherewithal to get out of their own heads and see that there is value there.
Yeah, that's certainly part of the process. Having a team that's willing to do that and take that step is a bold one, but it can pay dividends for sure.
All right. So first thing we have to do is we have to open up the culture. We have to be in the right mindset for it and get everybody on board, right? I would imagine that might be a challenge with some companies as well.
Yeah. So, that onboarding and kind of training process early on is really crucial. And so, from our experience, the first 2 weeks on a job, it's important for anybody you're bringing on your team, and just how you engage them in the company culture and the training process. But, specifically with the immigrant community or refugee community, you really have to look at your typical processes as they currently are and how those might need to be slightly adjusted.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about systems.
Yeah. So that's what So I think two of the things that are just kind of easy across the board at any kind of company, any industry. What does that onboarding process look like? I think that word's much more common in our culture now for companies to have something that they do for someone who's, first day on the job. But whatever that process looks like, if you want to engage a community that didn't grow up in the U.S. and maybe have some different cultural backgrounds or even workplace norms, you just need to consider that process needs to be longer, maybe twice as long as whatever it is currently. If it's a 2-hour process, take 4 hours. If it's a 2-day process, take a few days. But just drag it out a little bit to make sure that people are comfortable, they're able to ask all the questions, and they're really able to adjust to the expectations you have for them.
So you really need to spend the time on the onboarding process. It's going to take a lot more time up front, but the payoff that you're looking at is at the end of the process, once they get acclimated and they start producing. Yeah,
they'll move pretty quickly, and they'll feel that much more invested in through that process, and there's true care for them as an individual and their ability to contribute to the company. So we suggest, for companies to match individuals up with a partner who can kind of help answer their questions. We've had situations that are very simple, but something as simple as like someone not knowing if it was appropriate for them to stop work and go to the bathroom. And as crazy as that sounds, that there's simple things like that can make someone feel like they're not welcome, or they don't feel comfortable in a new environment. So, just walking through some of those basic things is really important. And we just say often, don't leave anything to chance. Over communicate, even when you feel like it's unnecessary. If you're really dedicated to the process, over communicate on the front end.
Okay, so how do we do this in the interview process? Because you've got a language barrier. How do you identify whether or not somebody's going to be a good hire? What do I need to do? What advice would you give me as a company to be able to identify which people are the best people to hire?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because often resume is not going to really translate. So we highly suggest that you have some sort of task or project that someone can put their hands on and actually do something, right? So we worked with a software development company, and it was early on in the business, and I remember they just needed someone who had some experience with SQL, and which is, a very basic platform. And so we had a guy who said he taught SQL. He was a college professor, pretty young guy, and he seemed pretty capable, and so we trusted him, and we sent him to the job interview. Like I said, this was like very early on, and he got there, and he could answer all their questions, and they gave him a test on the computer, and he sat down, and he's like, "Oh, I've never used a computer before." They're like, "How have you taught software development, but you've never used a computer?" He's like, "Oh, we did it all on chalkboard." So, I mean, obviously getting hands-on as soon as possible and giving them the opportunity to prove themselves. And sometimes they'll take away that, they're not quite there yet, and they need to continue to develop their skill. But in many cases, you recognize the language barrier, they've got it.
So you almost need to treat everybody as if they are a new grad hire, basically. Are you bringing interpreters into the process to make sure that the language barrier is you can communicate effectively?
Yeah, in some cases you could do that. I mean, I think if you're not going to have an interpreter there, though, day after day for whatever job is being done, that may not be the best thing to do in the interview process, right? If they're not able to communicate with you at that point, even though it will improve over time, that may not be the best, first hire. But, we focus in many cases on finding someone who is fluent early on or close to it. And then other people can follow after them that may not quite be fluent, and they can be that bridge builder and kind of communicate and recruit from their own community.
So you're using that first hire as somebody who can actually communicate effectively and then kind of branching out from there.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really practical way to look at it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Your first hire should be somebody who you can communicate with, and the second hire and third, subsequently, you can trust that person to lead that process.
Right, and if you've got a strong culture, you'll find that first person is going to be really excited to share about the job that he has or she has.
Sure.
And they'll recruit other people from their community, which is a win-win for everybody.
All right, key takeaways. So what would you say would be 3 things you want our listeners to walk away with?
Yeah, so I think we've mentioned a couple of times just recognizing the value of the refugee community and not just kind of falling into the big blanket issues, but recognizing on an individual level there's a desire to contribute. And I would say outside of that, consider ways that your company can employ refugees. So it could be as simple as just going on Google and searching refugee agencies or refugee communities near me, and finding out what's going on in your neighborhood, and see if there's ways that you can engage with a nonprofit or with the community in general to employ or volunteer or be able to contribute locally.
That's a fantastic bit of advice. Shoot, Chris, we're just about out of time for today's show. I want to thank you for your time investment today and welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. Now, what would be the best way in which members of our community can reach you? And, take a second and plug your book, too.
Yeah, thanks. So the book just released a couple weeks ago, and we hit the #1 new release on Amazon. Refugee Workforce on Amazon, Kindle and paperback, and Audible's coming soon. And then overall, our website is ampliorecruiting.com.
Spell that out for me.
We're working in, AMPLIO. So it's the Spanish word for ample.
Okay.
And working in several cities across the country and looking to grow into 25 locations by 2025. Would love any ideas or support from companies or individuals that want to be a part of that.
Well, we're here to support you and help you build. So happy to do that. All right. Well, Chris, thanks so much again for joining us. I want to thank our listening audience for tuning into this week's episode of Higher Power. A quick thanks to our team, our engineer, Paul Roberts, our producers, Andrea Ballin, Chancey Ryle, and Ayla Gerard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. We love and welcome your feedback. And after all, this show is for you, so let us know how we can make it better for you. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at Higher, that's Hire, Power, Power, Radio, Radio.com. Or you can drop me an email at rick@stridesearch.com to learn more about our passive talent webinars and workshops. Tune in next week. Our guest is going to be Carrie Ransom. Carrie is an entrepreneur here in Orange County, is also the host of Accelerate OC. I'm your host, Rick Gerard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power with Rick Gerard on OC Talk Radio.